internet are facing a tough new crackdown. The government's vowing to clean up the ever-expanding home shopping industry, as Tom Maskell reports now.
With a quarter of all UK households having access to a PC, there's no longer the need to visit the high street, with everything from food to flights available online. Many companies offering goods or services via the internet already subscribe to voluntary codes of best practice, but as from today, all web traders will be bound by the new government regulations. Among the benefits, it will give you more detailed information up front so you know what you're buying into, 7 working days to decide if the product's suitable, protection from credit card fraud, and it says that your order should take no more than 30 days to arrive. The move has been welcomed by consumer groups.
Some research recently has shown that people are afraid of using particularly e-commerce, and that's the main area of distance selling that this will have an impact on. And any additional rights that gives consumers the assurance that they need in order to take the plunge will be helpful.
And the code will also protect consumers who choose to buy over the phone or through catalogue mail order.
The fox hunting season's officially begun, but it could be the last time we'll see the hounds on the chase. A parliamentary bill banning hunting will be announced in the Queen's speech, and there's a good chance that it will become law. Avovi Todd has taken a look at all the issues involved.
Anti-hunt campaigners are hoping scenes like this will soon be history, but those who back blood sports are feeling far from threatened. Since the war, there have been at least 35 attempts to ban hunting, but it's never made it to the statute books. When Labour came into office promising a free vote on the issue, anti-hunt campaigners believed their time had come. But after coming to power, the government never introduced legislation, and a private member's bill in 1997 failed. Huge countryside rallies put ministers under intense pressure from the pro-hunt lobby, who argued it was an attack on rural Britain. But now, under equal pressure from backbenchers, it's expected the government will include a bill to ban hunting in the Queen's speech.
Class sizes in primary schools have fallen, but at the expense of older children. New government figures confirm that less than 50,000 5-, 6- and 7-year-olds are in classes of more than 30. But class sizes for the 8 to 11-year-olds are still higher than when Labour came to power. Now, apparently, the British don't believe in love at first sight. At least that's according to a new survey. Do you know, less than 1 in 10 of us say romance can blossom when our eyes meet across a crowded room. But in the Mediterranean, sizzling Latin lovers say many of their conquests happen with just one smouldering glance. They're probably right. Matt Fordy's been trying it out for himself.
It's certainly in the eyes of Italians, but a new survey says that most Brits simply don't believe in smouldering glances across crowded rooms. Less than 1 in 10 couples say they met with a look of love. That's compared with nearly half of our hot-blooded Italian cousins who claim it was an essential part of meeting their lover. Here in Britain, we're more cynical.
You can be really attracted to somebody straight away, but it takes much, much longer than an evening to know whether you're in love with somebody.
I don't even know if love exists at the moment. I'm feeling like quite bitter.
And if you ask me if I believe in love at first sight, well, I'm afraid the answer has to be no. I've been here for an hour and a half and my date still hasn't turned up. Well, I suppose that's life. This is Matt Fordy for GMTV, desperately looking for love.
We just want the address of that restaurant, we'll both be there. Anyway, some health news now. Scientists have moved closer to tackling a deadly strain of meningitis. Researchers have isolated the DNA that causes the meningococcal bee bug to become so dangerous. A potential vaccine could be ready for development by next year. Let's hope so. And there's been another scientific breakthrough. British doctors believe they've developed the first effective cure for the crippling disease rheumatoid arthritis. The drug's been developed by a team at University College in London. Avovi Todd sent this report earlier in the week.
Rheumatoid arthritis is the biggest cause of disability in the UK. Sufferers like Kate Nash are waiting cautiously for details about the new drug before raising their hopes. She's concerned that even if it does herald a breakthrough, tight NHS budgets will mean few patients will benefit.
They are very expensive, and of course our members are extremely concerned that they're not going to be able to get hold of them.
The effects of the most recent treatments are not permanent, and they cost £10,000 per patient each year. That's out of the reach of many health authorities. The drug being unveiled today appears to be far more effective, removing defective antibodies which attack healthy tissue in a single treatment. It's hoped this will make it much cheaper. It's believed the same drug may be effective in treating the sufferers of Crohn's disease and lupus. But doctors say the results of a large-scale international trial must be seen before the drug's success can be determined.
Mobile phones could be contributing towards the falling levels of teenage smokers. Text messaging and phoning friends has become much trendier than picking up a cigarette, according to research by Nottingham University. Many teenagers now prefer to spend their pocket money on pay-as-you-go phone cards rather than a packet of cigarettes. Butchers in England and Wales now face prosecution unless they comply with strict new laws on hygiene. The rules have already been introduced in Scotland, where 20 people died in a food poisoning outbreak 4 years ago. Our Scotland correspondent Jane Chilton sent this report on Monday.
Today is the deadline for all butchers to apply for a licence to sell raw and cooked meats from the same outlet. If they don't, they'll be prosecuted. The licence aims to avoid cross-contamination between cooked and raw meats, resulting from Britain's worst food poisoning outbreak 4 years ago in Lanarkshire, when 22 people died. But while the laws are being tightened up, a Ministry of Agriculture report claims nearly 1 in 10 cows carries a potentially lethal strain of E. coli, giving further rise for public concern.
The notion of eradication from cattle is a pipe dream, and what we have to concentrate on is preventing infection by all these other measures like licensing butchers.
Many responsible butchers would argue that what they're being asked to do under the new regulations is what they've been practising for years. But there are still some butchers who haven't applied for the licence. And unless they comply, they could face prosecution and going out of business. Jane Chilton, GMTV News, Aberdeen.
Millions of young women get so drunk that they regularly put themselves in danger. That's according to sobering new figures. A survey says they end up walking home alone at night, driving whilst drunk, or having one-night stands without protection. And 30% of doctors say that cannabis should be legalised. According to a new report, a quarter of doctors believe that the drug is less addictive than alcohol or cigarettes. It'll increase pressure on the government to relax some of our drugs laws. Now, many of the oldest and most beautiful buildings in this country are our churches. But a new survey has shown that the VAT bill on repairs and maintenance is crippling the church owners. Well, as the businesses, pensioners and fuel protesters anxiously await Gordon Brown's pre-budget statement, the Church of England has its own plea for the Chancellor, and joining me to tell us more is the Financial Secretary of the Archbishop's Council, Sean Farrell. Thank you very much for coming in. Well, do tell us more then. What do you want to hear from Gordon Brown?
Well, I think, as you said in your introduction, the Church of England looks after a very considerable proportion of the historic heritage of this country, 16,000 churches and cathedrals. Whilst everybody enjoys that, and they are focal points for the community, they generate tourism, the actual burden of keeping them in good repair and upkeep falls on a very small proportion of the population, the regular church members. We also feel there's an inconsistency in government policy here, because it purports to support conservation, and yet when the church seeks to conserve its properties, the repair bills concerned attract the full rate of VAT, 17.5%, However, if you do a new build or alterations to a church, it's 0 rated.
Which is a sort of, which actually inspires people to possibly knock down the old churches and stick a new one up instead.
We have heard of such a...
What's the extent of the problem? I mean, and we all know, I mean, VAT, iniquitous things, 17.5%, but what sort of amounts of money are we looking at that the church is stomping up then?
Right. The church spends well over £100 million a year keeping its buildings in good repair. A large majority of that is repairs. A large majority of that, therefore, attracts 17.5%. We've calculated that the church spends at least £20 million a year on VAT alone.
That's enormous. But then you get grants as well. It seems just daft, doesn't it? You know, give it with that hand and take it away with that.
That's precisely it. We receive a very similar sum in the way of grant aid from government. And as you say, it's taken with one hand and given back with the other.
Presumably then you want to see VAT taken off repairs for the churches?
Yes, that would be an ideal situation for us, but VAT is a European law. We understand that. The government must work within the VAT regulations of the economic community. But there is currently an experimental period in place whereby certain labour-intensive services can, with the consent of the member states concerned, apply a reduced rate of VAT. It had been our hope that that particular directive would include church repairs, but at the end of the day it did not. However, that directive does come up for review in 2002, and what we want from the UK government is support for our case for that directive to be extended to include repairs to church buildings, and then they would be in a position to reduce the rate of VAT.
So when we have this the pre-budget statement, what would you like him to stand up and say, in a nutshell?
I'd like him to say 3 things really. Really to acknowledge that the financial burden for this heritage is falling unfairly on too small a proportion of the population. Secondly, in acknowledging that they will support our case for an extension of that directive when it comes up for review in 2 years' time. In the meantime, it would be wonderful if he could offer us some additional grant aid so that we don't give him back exactly what he gives us with the other hand.
And if you don't get any of that, you know, what's the outcome? What's the stake?
Well, I think church buildings the risk is that they will become less and less well maintained, and I don't think that's anything that the population would like to see their churches falling into disrepair. But like every other organisation at the moment, the church is feeling the financial pinch, and something would obviously have to go.
I mean, shouldn't this possibly be more the responsibility of English Heritage?
Part of the grant assistance that we receive each year is via English Heritage, but as you've seen from the figures I've given you, it meets a small proportion of the total cost, £100 million a year. Obviously, in some European countries, the responsibility for maintaining the ecclesiastical heritage falls on the state. That isn't the case in this country. So we have to make the best we can with the money that's made available to us.
If you did get your kind of dream come true and Gordon Brown did stand up and say that, do you not think a lot of people might think, well, you know, why the Church of England? We live in a multiracial society now. It's, you know, it's favouritism again. It's compounding that kind of haves and have-nots in our society. I mean...
Yeah. Well, we've been working very closely, firstly with all the other churches in Britain and Ireland. The research that you referred to at the beginning of the programme there has been commissioned by something called the Church's Main Committee. That represents 38 different church denominations. We're also in regular contact with the amenity societies and other voluntary societies who very much support our case, and we support their case. So this is an issue that goes beyond just the Church of England, and we'd like to see these concessions introduced on a wider base.
And I know you also sound sort of suggesting maybe a bit of a kind of deal with the government, sort of tax breaks in return for using rural churches, you know, to include some other amenities like post offices and things like that.
There has been a certain amount of speculation about that. There are a lot of practical difficulties in using churches for these kind of things.
It kind of goes... Does it go against the grain or not? I don't know.
Well, some people, I think, would have a problem with a church building, which is a place of worship, being used for commercial activities. Think of the prospect of a cash machine in a church, which is then ram-raided, or somebody is mugged whilst taking money out of a cash machine in the churchyard.
It kind of takes away what a church is, doesn't it?
I think it does. So there are a lot of practical problems, but having said that, there is no doubt that churches are a focal point for many local communities.
I mean, do you sometimes feel the government might have got it in for you a bit, because there's also new disability legislation, so you've got to make, you know, you've got to spend more money on that.
We have, and by 2004, like every other service provider, and for the purposes of the legislation, we are a service provider, we must ensure that our buildings are accessible and usable for people with all forms of disability. And that in itself will impose a considerable financial strain on us, and we're not aware that we're going to get any additional help for that.
Well, best of luck.
Thank you.
Hope you get it sorted out. Sean, thanks very much for coming to speak to us.
Thank you.
Well, we're going to go over to the news desk now. Join us though in part 2, when we'll be finding out just how a little book like this promises to make big changes to your future. So in a couple of minutes.
Good morning. The torrential rain and
Rangers hit 7 against St Mirren. Leaders Celtic take on Kilmarnock today. England steamrolled Fiji to reach the Rugby League World Cup quarter-finals. They'll meet Ireland, who beat the Maoris. In Kentucky, no joy for Frankie Dettori at the Breeders' Cup meeting. The one British success came from Calanisi, ridden by Johnny Murtagh in the Breeders' Cup turf.
a grand total of 32 ticket holders shared last night's £20 million National Lottery jackpot. Just in case you missed them, the winning numbers were 2, 8, 17, 29, 33 and 44, and the bonus ball was 11. Each winner will receive £625,000. Now for a look at the weather. Any ice and patchy mist will gradually clear this morning, and many places will then be dry and bright. However, cloud will build up from the southwest, bringing outbreaks of rain. The wet and windy conditions will slowly spread over most of England, Wales and Ireland this afternoon and into tonight, increasing the risk of flooding. However, Scotland will stay largely dry and bright with some sunshine. It'll be cold everywhere, with temperatures no higher than 12 Celsius. It's 6:36. I'll be back at 7 o'clock, but now it's time for part 2 of the review.
Thank you. Now, 3 years ago, the Runnymede Trust found Britain guilty of widespread prejudice and discrimination against our 2 million Muslims. But next week's Islam Awareness Week hopes to reverse that intolerance by increasing our understanding. Well, joining me to discuss the plans for the week is Britain's first Muslim peer, Baroness Uddin. Thank you very much. It's nice to see you again on the programme.
Lovely to see you.
First of all, let's start at the beginning. I mean, what does there really need to be an Islam Awareness Week?
I think that this is a very, very good time for doing something like this because, you know, Ramadan is coming up. And I think that it is very important to celebrate some of the achievements of Muslim community. And I think that, you know, I don't know whether you're aware that this is part of a whole week of activities right up and down the country. So basically we're calling all Muslims, all different parts of the country to have different activities whereby they involve their neighbors, their politicians, their organizations to promote better understanding and, you know, open the door and say, here we are. I mean, you know, it is always better to know your neighbors, and I think that animosity will be lessened because, you know, you only have enemy or people you don't know and you don't understand and therefore you don't trust. And I think that, you know, particularly also the climate is right for something like this. And as you know, all the 3 leaders of the major party have agreed to have a presence in the House of Commons next week.
You said achievements. What sort of achievements do you feel that perhaps we should all know about that?
I think, you know, just the fact that, you know, British Muslim community in this country have been very peaceful, you know, since the early 60s, their presence, you know, that they're here, that they participate in civil societies. But, I mean, you know, that is only one objective of the week, of course. There are also a range of other issues that we want to highlight, including the fact that there is severe underrepresentation in public life of Muslim community.
Why is that? And is that just the Muslim community? Or is it a general sort of intolerance, misunderstanding, not knowing about all sort of ethnic minorities, if you can call it that?
I think that if you look at every single government reports time and time again, it's the Bangladeshi community, the Pakistani community and other Muslim communities that are at the bottom of the pile of the statistics as being either affected or simply not being present. And if you look at Parliament, it's the same thing. Well, I think that, certainly over a prolonged period of time, the Muslim community were vilified and not understood at all in public. And I think that, over the last 2-3 year period, the government has done an enormous amount of, it's gone way forward, I think, in ensuring that, we're all tolerant about each other. It's advocated peace, it's advocated multiculturalism, it's advocated other languages as being respectful. So I think, all that has worked towards the fact that we can now say, how about a concentration on the issue to both highlight the issues that are around, that are outstanding, but also actually talk about some of the successes. And we have enormous amount of successes right up and down the country, from scholars to politicians to, school achievements.
You mentioned politicians, and you said this government has actually done quite a lot, but there are very few black or Asian candidates who are put into safe seats.
I think that as a local government person in my previous incarnation, I think I was talking about local government. The Muslim community made enormous impact in local government right up and down the country. But where we abysmally have failed is to produce sufficient number of people in the House of Commons and,
Who do you blame for that? I mean,
party. I mean, come on, we've got to be very frank about it. That is the party themselves who've got to undertake this role to ensure, we had to do that for the Labour Party to ensure that there were enough numbers of women. That in itself is a blatant lesson for all the parties to learn. And I think some of the parties are waking up. Unfortunately, not enough, soon enough to make a difference at this coming election, and that's one of the failures that we'll be highlighting.
And also when you say that the parties are all going to be there, their presence will be felt, is that, do you sometimes feel that's just a bit of kind of soft soapy stuff on the top, and did you say that realistically they're not actually putting the candidates forward and it isn't going to make a difference at the next election?
I agree with you totally that, there is nothing that we can be proud of over the last few years in terms of national politics. And if you look at, the total absence, not only on television, of course, but, in public life general of, Muslim women and men, abysmal. And I think we've got to take some responsibility for saying that's one of the area of failures that we need to address. And party politics is so inundated with lots of different kinds of prejudice, as well as, religious intolerance and misunderstanding. So all that has compounded into the fact that we haven't got the candidates and we haven't put forward the candidates. And we're going to have to take it very seriously if we really believe in a tolerant society, if we really believe in an equal society.
Do you think this government does, and do you think they will do something positive?
I think that we made the right start, and I'll have to say that, won't I, anyway? But yeah, I'm there. But no, but I think that in a serious manner, I think that we haven't done enough, and really we've got a lot to apologise for and a lot more to get on with.
The Runnymede Trust recently said that the term British has racial connotations. Would you agree with that? There's been a lot of discourse about it.
I've looked at the report. I think that people have to look at that report in a different way. I'm debating this very issue in Parliament in 2-3 weeks' time. I put an unstart question down to discuss this because I don't think so. I don't think that's what it means. I'm very proud always to say I'm British Muslim or British Bangladeshis because, for me it doesn't have, and for many it may, but certainly for me and most of my communities that doesn't apply. And to be fair to the Parekh report, I don't think that's what it states.
I mean, do you feel that sort of intolerance is lessening in this country? Thanks to things like this, hopefully it will do it even further.
Yes.
But we do get reports out, and it just doesn't seem to be almost getting worse sometimes.
Yes, I think the incident. If you look at the incidents of reporting, both incidents of Islamophobia as well as, other physical racist incidents, then you would think that the serious incidents have increased. But there are also, alongside that, all the other things that are that are happening that are good. On a national level, we've never heard prime ministers and home secretaries and senior ministers in government saying we won't tolerate racism, we won't, you know, the Lawrence report, etc. And I think that there are some ways to go, but I think we've made a very, very good building block. You know, we're on the first step. We've got a long way to go.
Where does it still come from then? Is it something that has sort of begotten in the playground, or does it obviously comes from above first?
I think, you know, we have to take some responsibility at an institutional level, because if we're serious about eradicating any forms of discrimination and especially religious prejudice, it has to come from institution, has to be backed up by law, you know, Parliament, all the public institutions that we're responsible for. But then it will start, you know, filtering through to the playground. More or less, if you look at children, and I've got children in the playground, they don't say, you know, their friend is, you know, racist, or they don't say my friend is a Muslim. They say my friend is a friend. And so there are hope actually in the playground. If we only can make sure that, you know, institutions are getting their act together, they're giving the right message, they've got the proper law to back up all the activities, then, you know, sooner or later councils will have to react, as will then parents, you know, hopefully will stop telling their children to be racist.
And hopefully we'll get there in the end. Brandon, thank you very much for talking to us, and very best of luck with your launch tomorrow.
Can I just plug one thing, which is just to say that if anyone's interested, they can go on the website, and it's called it's Islam Awareness Week, iaaw.org.uk. Sorry about that.
iaaw.org.uk.
Yeah, okay.
We've got it. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, we go on to some foreign news now. Hopes for peace in the Middle East were raised when a deal was made between former Israeli Prime Minister and Palestinian leader Yasser Arafat. But violence has continued since the truce was made, causing both Israeli and Palestinian leaders to issue public appeals to their people to restore calm. On Tuesday, a Singapore Airlines Boeing 747 bound for Los Angeles crashed seconds after takeoff from the wrong runway in Taiwan. More than 80 of the 179 passengers and crew on board died in the disaster, thought to have been caused by an object on the runway. An American astronaut and 2 Russian cosmonauts have boarded the new International Space Station to become the platform's first long-term residents. The crew, who left Earth earlier this week, will spend the next 4 months in space. The NASA chief said it was a wonderful day for all the people who live on this planet. American presidential candidate George W. Bush has admitted to a drunk driving offence which happened 24 years ago. The revelation was leaked before next week's election, in which Republican nominee Bush is running neck and neck with his Democrat rival, Al Gore.
I regret that it happened, but it did. I've learned my lesson. As I mentioned, to many of you know that I quit drinking alcohol in 1986, and it was the right decision for me to make.
And back at home, thousands of people bid a spectacular farewell to Wembley Stadium this week with a star-studded charity concert which was hosted by Elton John. Julie Gatenby has this report.
The home of football closed its doors with a feast of music and fireworks. For many guests, it was a night to reminisce.
I remember fondly when I first played here when I was 15-year-old schoolboy. I couldn't believe that you would be allowed to play on such a surface. It was just fantastic.
When you go into a sport starting from 8 years old, thinking that you're dreaming of wanting to be a heavyweight champion of the world and only dreaming about it at 8, setting out and writing it down on paper and actually achieving it in Wembley, unbelievable.
Inevitably, football found its way into the finale. The game's greatest legend, Pelé, who never got the chance to play at Wembley, kicked the final ball. And with that, the whistle was blown and the game was over for the Twin Towers. The Bulldozers move in next week.
Thousands of stressed-out people have bought a copy of The Little Book of Calm in an effort to bring some peace into their lives. But now there's a little book that can help more than just your immediate situation. Richard Lawrence has written a book that gives advice on how to guarantee enlightenment for both tomorrow and your future life. And he joins me now. It's nice to see you again.
Hi, Anne. It's great to be back here.
silky.
It really is.
Smooth thing.
No, it
here.
is. It's nice to be back here.
Now listen, your book gives advice on how to guarantee enlightenment for both tomorrow and your future life.
Wow.
Sounds a bit of a tall order, doesn't it?
Actually, I didn't say that, but that's fine, and because we're all going to find enlightenment either now or in a future life. But I think a lot of people think of karma as something that just happens in relation to past lives, or something where we're being judged and we're found we have to atone, or we have punishments, rewards, and it's nothing to do with that. Karma is a thing that happens 24 hours a day, even in our dreams, which can be very enlightening. And people have great experiences in their dreams. I mean, 1 in 5 people's had a premonition that came true later in this country. So I think really karma is something we can, instead of looking upon it as a difficult or a problematical thing or a bad thing, it's a most wonderful thing. And it can change our lives.
How would you define it then? What's your definition?
Well, it's defined in many ways, and interestingly, no one has replaced the word karma, and you get it in pop songs now, you know, Instant Karma, Radiohead, Boy George, people like that. It really means, as you sow, so shall you reap. But as I say in the book also, as you reap, so shall you sow. And, you know, or in the Jewish idea, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth, which isn't a punishment. It's saying that what you put out, what goes around comes around, as they say in America.
It's very much a kind of in thing to say at the moment, isn't it? I mean, I've heard so many people talking about, oh, well, you know, karma will catch up with him.
Yeah, and again, that's like bad karma.
Yes,
it's, you know, it's going to get
it's usually said with regard to bad karma.
But what I'm interested in is good karma. You know, you can make good karma for yourself. You can heal people. You can put out, I mean, it's been proved this year that a positive attitude gives you a 19% longer and healthier life. The optimist has a 19% longer life, according to the Mayo Clinic in Minnesota. And that's an aspect of karma, too. Putting out positive energy, you get something back. So you can create this great karma for yourself in all the areas of your life: emotions, health, finance, and above all, spirituality.
But you have to say then that the Bishop of Rochester has sort of decried these pick and mix religions where people take the best bits and sort of stick them all together. And he mentioned karma as one of the things, a bit of a fad, and nobody really knows anything about it.
Well, then get my book. I mean, the thing is that Christianity has a karmic element in it. I mean, as you sow, so shall you reap, is taken from the Bible. But so do the Eastern religions. I mean, the Lord Buddha said, to every action, there's an equal and opposite reaction. And even, I believe, in the Islamic
culture. Just taking up on that point, and again, back to the Bishop of Rochester, because, you know, he said that we're taking things from what's actually a very severe religion and making it into something with possibly less significance.
Well, I don't really know what he's talking about there. And first of all, it's not severe. I think it's true to say that some people have the wrong idea of karma because they see it as a punishment. It's not a punishment. It's all about lessons. But on the other hand, if you are having a difficult karma or a difficult time in your life in any area, and you can see there's a reason for it, there's a karmic reason, there's a purpose for it, that you're actually learning something, it's far easier to cope with.
It's not a kind of cop-out. Oh, well, you know, put a reason to it and therefore it'll be okay.
No, it's not a cop-out because it really works. You can test it in your life. You know, what you put out comes back to you. We know that in simple things like gossip. If you're a person who goes around, and we all gossip maybe a bit, but if you spread really malicious gossip, people start to get fed up with you, and they'll start talking about you. If you go around putting out love and light, people will feel well disposed to you, and you'll get love and light back. It's very simple.
So sometimes some of it sounds very kind of almost callous, doesn't it? You know, back to the eye for an eye. And yet, having said that, some of that says you shouldn't do an eye for an eye. That if somebody's giving you bad, being unpleasant to you, if you're nice back.
Yeah, that's right. Because if you send somewhere down the line, the viciousness has to stop. So what the lesson is that if you put out something bad, you'll get something bad back in order to learn not to do it. It's all about learning. It's not about punishing. But if you're receiving some bad things from people, anger, jealousy, we all get it from time to time, and all you send back is love, positive thought, not stupidity, but you're honest, for example, with people, you don't lie to them even if they're lying to you, then you'll transmute that and you'll find that your life will change and that you will actually receive the sort of things you've been putting out.
Where did you come across this? How has it all come to you?
I came across it at university. I looked into Buddhism, into Hinduism, but I want to stress that you don't actually have to be religious to embrace karma, because it's a sort of thing, I mean, that we're all familiar with, you know.
Well, I must admit, I think it was only last week we were talking to a lady who's a witch, a pagan, and she talked about karma too, exactly.
Absolutely,
the same thing.
and many of the so-called pagan, I mean, today, people are going to be lighting their bonfires and throwing an effigy of a human being on them, which isn't a very spiritual thing to be teaching our children to do, but that is a so-called pagan ceremony. It goes back pre-Christianity. It's to do with the revering the sun and the light as we go into the darker months. A lot of these things have traditions that are very great, and the karma is something which crosses all the barriers. You know, well, as you sow, so shall you reap.
What about meditation? Because at the end of the book, there are two little meditations, aren't there? I mean, do you have to know things about meditation as well? Does that help?
It helps immensely. I mean, meditation, we've had National Stress Awareness this week. I mean, that can cure stress problems. Meditation is something which, if everybody practiced it, they'd be able to relax more, they'd be more focused, and above all, they'd know their real selves. Because another thing that was proved this week by Southampton General Hospital scientists is that we have a consciousness beyond the brain. And meditation, so we are more than our brain. That may upset some total atheists, but we have something, whether you call it a soul, it proves, I believe, life after death. If we start to meditate, we start to gain contact with our real self, which is more than the sum total of our thoughts and our emotions.
And anybody watching now, because that's my thought, because I've often thought, oh, I'd love to do that, but I don't know how to do it. I mean, do you have to...
You can easily do it, Anne, easily do it. All it is, actually, is watching the mind. It's as simple as that. And as you start to watch the mind, first of all, there are a lot of proven health benefits from meditation. And some people use it on the National Health Service. But as you start to watch the mind, you gain a better perspective. Immediately you feel calm. As a matter of fact, I will say this, there's a festival this week coming up called the Healing Arts Festival. I'm not running it, so it's not a plug for me. But we will be doing meditation there. We'll also be launching the book. It's in London, and if people want to know about these things, they can get a free brochure on that. It's 020 7736 4187. That's the phone number.
Say it again.
020 7736 4187. That's the Healing Arts Festival in Victoria in London, and it runs from Thursday through till Sunday.
So if people can't get, they can always give you a ring and you'll send
them a brochure. Give us a ring, send them a free brochure.
Well, thank you very much. I just have to do this, and I'll do it slowly for Wendy, because she doesn't know I'm going to do this. It says, if you love something, throw it to the wind. If it's blown back, it's yours forever. That's a Chinese saying.
That's an old Chinese saying.
Lovely.
It's beautiful.
Good. Thank you very much. As usual, it's just gone like that.
I know, but it's great. Thank you.
See you again. And that's it. As we said, it's gone like that. All we've got time for. Join us again next week for our regular look back at the week's news and for some very interesting interviews too from all of us on The Review. Enjoy the rest of the weekend, won't you? Bye-bye.